Dennis Nilsen is one of Britain's biggest serial killers of the 20th century. He's admitted to murdering 15 young men at his homes in London. What drove an apparently respectable civil servant to go on a 4-year killing spree? Why did he confess all to police? And who were those who escaped his murderous attacks?
Dennis Nilsen always referred to the day of his arrest as the day that help came. He knew the police would be there, and he knew that his life from this day onward would be entirely different, and he was prepared for it.
On the 9th of February 1983, police were called to 23 Cranley Gardens in North London. Human remains had been found in the drain leading from Dennis Nilsen's upstairs flat.
In the time we were waiting, I was trying to work out what kind of guy was going to walk in through that door. How was I going to handle him? Was I going to have to be firm with him right from the off? Maybe he's a little bit strange. Maybe I've got to handle him differently.
Are you Dennis Nilsen?
Yes.
I'm Detective Chief Inspector Jay from Hornsey Police Station. I've come about your drains.
Since when have the police been interested in blocked drains?
I'm upstairs and I'll tell you.
His manner was calm. He was quite relaxed.
By the way, these are my colleagues.
The health inspector?
No, they're police officers. This is Detective Inspector McCusker and this is Detective Butler.
He looked like Mr. Ordinary. He had a suit on. He had steel-rimmed spectacles. In the context of what he'd done, he was frighteningly normal.
As soon as he opened the door to his apartment, the smell of death came out of the doors.
He knew what was in there, and he knew that we were going to find what was in there.
The reason I'm interested in your drains is because they were blocked with human remains.
Oh, good grief, how awful.
Don't mess about. Where's the rest of the body?
In 2 plastic bags in the wardrobe next door. I'll show you.
I think in a way there was some relief there from him that it was all coming to an end.
What's been happening?
I put my head inside the front room and there was this distinct smell of decomposing flesh.
I'll tell you about it at the police station. Presumably you're going to take me there. What you want is in there. It's locked.
I don't think I even looked in the wardrobes that were in the room.
These are the keys.
You can stay locked for the minute. I can smell it. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder and taking you to Hornsey Police Station. You're not obliged to say anything unless you wish to do so, but anything you do say may be taken down in writing and may be given in evidence.
On the way back to the police station, he started to tell us that it was 16. At least he thought he'd murdered 16. But at the first interview, when we sat down with him and listed all of the victims, it was quite clear it was 15.
I arranged to have a photograph taken of Nilsen. Normally it's simply the face, but in this case, in the seriousness of the offence, I thought it better just to have a complete, full-length picture taken. I think it's absolutely incredible that he had gone on for so long, and I think if he had been able to work out how to get rid of the bodies in a better way, he would have killed a lot more people.
It was my judgment that got the guy caught, and if I hadn't have pushed it, then the guy would have got away with it, and possibly still doing it now, you know.
Nearly a week before Dennis Nilsen was arrested, the toilets at 23 Cranley Gardens had become blocked. all 5 tenants in the building got together and decided to complain.
The letter was delivered to the landlords, handwritten, saying that this was an intolerable situation. It was inhuman to be expected to live in these conditions. And that letter was written by Dennis Nilsen, which can lead only to one conclusion, that he knew the game was up, he knew he was going to be arrested, he was relieved that he was going to be arrested, and he engineered his own arrest.
I was called to 23 Cranley Gardens because it was a blocked drain. Lifting the manhole cover was... the smell was unbelievable. I was down there at least 5 or 6 times, and by that time I'd recognised, you know, various body parts that were most definitely human. I then made the phone call to my boss, surrounded by the residents of the house and Nilsen. My boss said, quite graphically, to leave it, and we would return in the morning.
In the hours before the plumber was due to return, Dennis Nilsen seems to have had a change of heart. He made a last-minute attempt to cover his tracks.
2 witnesses told us that at 1 a.m. The previous morning, they'd heard noises, and when they checked, they found that the guy upstairs, who they knew as Dennis, was standing at the door of the apartments, and he was wearing a vest, he was sweating, and his arms were all dirty. And this was a cold February evening, and what he had been up to was that he had been out and he'd gone down the manhole and he'd removed the parts of bodies that Dynarod had put on the ledge in the manhole.
The following morning, on lifting the manhole cover, I wasn't surprised that it was empty, it was spotless. I inserted my arm in the pipe on the house side, and I managed to get a strip of flesh.
It was explained to me that they had unblocked a drain and revealed what looked like remains of a human body and some pieces of bone. I decided that the best thing that I could do was to take these off to a pathologist, and he said, "You're right, it's human." He said, "Not only is it human," he said, "but your victim's been strangled." By pure chance, I had taken to him a piece of the victim's neck, and there was a clear ligature mark on it. This was an extraordinary case from the very beginning, because for the first time ever, we had a murder in reverse. We had a man saying, "I've murdered 15 people," and we didn't know that anybody had been murdered until the day we arrested him.
The case was extraordinary for another reason. The man police were about to question had once been one of their own. News of the sensational discovery at Cranley Gardens hit the newspapers within 24 hours. Detectives suspected the information had leaked from the police station, but the tip-off had come from the plumber.
The story had to be told. It was just horrific. I rang the guys from the Mirror. They were round at my house within half an hour. All I got paid for that was 300 and something pounds. It was nothing.
The Mirror was the only paper to use the story on day 1. On day 2, everybody used the story.
We were conscious of the fact that we had the world's press looking at us, and we wanted to get it right.
Peter Jay was one of 2 officers who interviewed Dennis Nilsen 16 times over a total of 31 hours.
We had decided that there was a risk with Nilsen, that he might suddenly flip and we may not get all of the information out of him that we wanted.
I must first remind you that you are under caution, which means you're not obliged to say anything unless you wish to do so.
So we set up a little interview situation in my office, and we treated him with kid gloves.
I think Nilsen enjoyed having an audience, and I think he had a live audience for the first time in his life. And he was able to control the police and have them there and keep them interested in what he was saying, and I think that really feeds into his ego quite a bit.
Do you understand the caution?
Yes.
Yesterday evening with other officers, I went to your flat, where in the front room, in a wardrobe, we found 2 plastic bags, which we took to Hornsey Mortuary. When the bags were opened, they were found to contain dismembered parts of human bodies. Would you like to explain how that happened?
In what context?
How they came to be there.
Have you searched the rest of the flat?
Why?
There's some more in a tea chest in the corner of that room, and under the inverted drawer in the bathroom, the total of which are the remains of 3 people. I killed them by strangulation. I used something like string to do it. I cut up the bodies on plastic sheeting in the front room using one of 2 knives in the kitchen.
Nilsen was very determined to show that he wouldn't be intimidated, that he wouldn't be surprised above all, that he would do the surprising. He wanted to tell them everything, but he wanted to do it in his way and at his pace.
If you've got a serial killer, you think you're going to be facing somebody with evil eyes or someone who has an aggressive look about him. But he didn't have that at all. He was relaxed, he spoke clearly. He's quite an articulate sort of guy. It was very, very hard to associate what he'd done with Nilsen the man.
We're dealing with Cranley Gardens. I understand that you told my officers that you had previously lived at Willesden Green.
Yes, 195 Melrose Avenue, NW2, where I occupied the rear ground floor flat with exclusive use of the garden.
What will we find there?
Unless the site has been completely cleared by contractors, there should be much evidence of bone ash in 3 locations, which are the remains of 12 or 13 people.
Nilsen had lived at Melrose Avenue for 6 years. He drew a map of the garden there to show police where he'd burnt his victims. As detectives moved to their second crime scene, the media followed. The story was dominating the newspapers, and Nilsen was becoming increasingly fascinated by the coverage.
He asked me about the publicity, was there much? And I told him that there had been considerable publicity about the case. Why he wanted to read about himself, I really don't know. Whether he was now starting to enjoy the thought of notoriety. Maybe there was an element of that.
It wasn't an enjoyment of being in the news. It was a determination that the press should get it right. And that if they reported something as having occurred in April 1979, when in fact it was May 1979, he'd be furious at their ineptitude and inaccuracy. Those are the things that mattered to him. Dead things. Things which have no life, blood in them, but are simply facts.
While the media waited outside Nilsen's flats for news, inside a detailed forensic examination was underway.
It was a horrific job. I mean, it was the only case that I've ever experienced where it gave me disturbed sleep at night. So it was, from that point of view, quite unique in my experience.
In Cranley Gardens, we found the remains of 3 bodies. What Nilsen had done was to sever the bodies. He'd cut them up into 5 parts. The heads had all been boiled in a large saucepan that he had in the flat. And the purpose of that was to enable him to remove the flesh, flush that down the toilet, and then dispose of the bones through the ordinary dustman.
They showed me the wardrobe with the 2 bags in it. In the first bag, there was a part of a torso, and in another, there were dissected pieces of chest tissue. We had to piece the tissues together and portion the various limbs that had been dissected from the bodies into their rightful place.
The horrific details of Nilsen's crimes were already public by the time he first appeared in court. 48 hours after his